they have been begrudged or cursed or hexed. And oftentimes this particular concept will get a disproportionate amount of attention in terms of these conversations, and things can get a little bit difficult to describe because there's a lot of different ways to talk about this. What we're really talking about is when a person believes that their physical health has been affected from negativity, a negative connection with another person. And this can happen in a number of ways. Historically, people would write about this in a couple different ways. They would write about being begrudged. So if you are begrudged, do the following thing. There's one text that was written in 1813 here in Reading that talks about if you go to eat and food falls out of your mouth, it's an omen that you've been begrudged. So this idea that you've been begrudged means that if another person holds ill will against you, it can affect your health. It can affect your well-being. And there are cures for it. Sometimes it involves, here's a good one, you take your shirt off inside out and slam it in the door 3 times. The belief is that you're taking whatever negativity that's coming your way, you're putting it back at the other person. I don't necessarily condone any form of ritual violence against anybody else, but that's what that ritual is actually sharing. You're returning whatever it is to the other person who may have begrudged you. The other aspect of this is that there are also the ideas that it might not necessarily be something where a person just holds bad feelings about you. It may also be an intentional way that they may be trying to affect you. And that's more along the lines of what we would consider to be a hex in Pennsylvania Dutch, which can be used for a variety of different terms. I should say that term has a variety of different meanings, but generally speaking, it can be used to cast a curse on someone else, usually by ritual means, and often either for personal gain or remuneration or out of jealousy or something like that. But it's really interesting because there are a number of different types of rituals that can be used to affect a person who may have the perception that they have been cursed. And I'm saying have the perception because, of course, we don't really know what happens in these situations. We all have feelings about what happens in our lives. I'm not going to tell another person what they should or should not believe, but that's just the way I happen to tell this story regarding people's perceptions. What you'll find is that there are a number of different ways to deal with this sort of a thing. Some of them involve simply calling down a blessing for that person and blessing them in the hopes to counteract it. Others involve things like where you'll here's one example that I came across in an 18th century manuscript. You're supposed to bake a gingerbread cookie that looks like the person that you think cursed you, and you're supposed to shoot them with a dime that is put into a smoothbore shotgun, and it sounds terrible. It sounds rather sinister. And the fact is that most healers would never engage in this kind of stuff because it seems petty. It seems like it's lacking insight. To create an effigy of someone else and to harm it as a way to try to overcome illness does not seem like an overly sensitive way to deal with illness. What you'll often find, however, are that powwowers are often thought to be people who have insight, and it's the insight they use that helps a person to overcome these situations, because you can meet violence with violence, you can meet poor feelings with poor feelings, but you're only going to get so far. What you typically find is that the healer has to help find an alternative way to view the situation. And I'll tell you one example. So a friend of mine who grew up in Reading told me that when she was a child she had a developmental disorder and she couldn't walk, and she had trouble, she couldn't speak. There were a number of things that basically in terms of her developmental benchmark, she was really, really far behind. And the parents started noticing it because she wasn't talking or vocalizing. She would crawl but poorly. She couldn't even balance herself when she was crawling, and they thought she must have some sort of some issues with her motor skills. So they called in the doctor, and the doctor's like, well, she seems healthy in every other way. We don't quite know what to do. Clearly there's something at work here, but we're going to have to just keep watch and be vigilant and do what we can to meet her needs and hope that she catches up. Because sometimes developmental disorders solve themselves. Other times they require intervention. Well, by the time she was almost 4, the parents were starting to sweat it out. They were getting really worried. Because you think about it, by that point in time, you're expecting your kid to run around and play, you're expecting your kid to be able to talk about and to engage verbally, and she was not. And now she only remembers a little bit of this, but she heard the story from her parents. So I'm relaying it from her. She was the person who experienced this. So they kept going to this doctor, and the doctor was like, I can't do anything. I don't really know what the matter is, because she seems healthy in every other way. The parents were dissatisfied with the explanation. So they called the powwower, who lived a couple doors down, and the woman came into the house and she said, the child's been cursed. And the parents were horrified because they said, oh, who would possibly curse our child? Well, the woman said, hold on, it's probably not what you think. Something else is at work here. She says, I sense that there's something that this child holds close to it that's causing the problem? Does the child have a toy or some sort of an item that it's clinging all the time to? And they said, well, yeah, there's that stuffed rabbit. And the powwower said, what's the story with the stuffed rabbit? Well, then the story came out, and everybody got bashful. Basically, what came out was that the rabbit was actually, much to the chagrin of the mother, was a gift for the child when the child was first born by an old flame of the husband. So his ex-girlfriend from long ago, gave this gift and clearly still had feelings for the husband in doing so. And the belief was that she had, unbeknownst to herself or to the family, through her jealousy, had actually passed along some form of a curse to this child. And that was how this powwower, this healer, thought about this situation and explained it. And she said, well, we've got to burn the rabbit. So they burned the rabbit, and the child just wailed and screamed and was so upset about this. But after that, the child rapidly started catching up, started basically doing all the things that kids do in a very short period of time. Within the year, she was on the same level with the rest of her peers in terms of all of the benchmarks that you would expect for a child who is almost 5. So it's a fascinating story. This woman went on to be a public school teacher in the Reading School District. And it's a really interesting story to hear these kinds of things, because here we've got a situation where there's a perception relating to a curse, but it's not so straightforward. It's not just a matter of a person saying, yes, this person cursed me, and we're going to return it to them or something like that. It was a much more complicated, even emotional situation to describe. And what's fascinating is it had to be the insight of that practitioner to be able to get into the family story, to be able to offer an alternative way to look at this, and hopefully to create some healing between the spouses who were probably also having some form of a thing going on at that point in time regarding how to relate to this aspect of their lives they weren't addressing. So it's a really interesting thing to hear these types of stories. This is just one of many stories that I've heard from local people regarding childhood ailments being related directly to interpersonal reactions or interpersonal problems. And it's a fascinating thing to see how folk medicine is used and leveraged in really strategic ways to help people in these circumstances.